Welcome to the MetaView podcast. Hear these non-fungible conversations. They will yield you great knowledge and perspective. But beware, they might also make your brain go boom. So watch your step, because this rabbit hole goes deep. Good luck and have fun. Welcome, Simona, to Frontiers of Coordination podcast.
Thank you so much for my invite. Great to be here.
How are you doing on this beautiful day?
As we were just chatting, I am very grateful to be experiencing high levels of vitamin D as per my move to Lisbon and the sunshine that comes after a good few years in the UK. So very grateful.
That's nice. Yeah, the weather in UK is always so disappointing.
I mean, for a while I was kind of fooling myself and thinking, oh, but there are so many wonderful things about it to make up for the weather. And then maybe Brexit happened and that's like started dwindling a little bit, that balance. But hey, swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, for me, sun is just so high up the list. It's hard to have anything to make up for the lack of sun.
I hear you.
Yeah, so you want to say a bit more about yourself for the people who don't know you? When we were in Amsterdam for the Global Governance Gathering, I was with a friend who's it was his first time on an Ethereum conference. And then you came and 10 people came rushing towards you to greet you. Yeah, Simona. And he was just like, what the fuck is happening? Who is this person? Why is everybody so hyped?
Who is she?
Yeah, so tell us a bit more about yourself and how you came to be so known or loved in the space.
I think one of the main reasons behind this kind of knowing everybody, or a lot of people knowing of me or knowing me, is because when I got involved and when I started in the crypto space, the levels of enthusiasm and energy were at very, very high levels. And I really, really got involved with a lot of things in the community. So aside the project that I co-founded, the Standard Bounties Protocol and the Bounties Network at the time in 2018, it really brought a lot of intersection with a lot of the different initiatives that were happening at the time. So we did a lot of collaborations with ETH Global in the very beginning of their journey. I worked with a lot of the projects that were, again, very, very early in the space, Status, and working on their mobile wallet at the time. And a lot of these very, very early stage projects and initiatives, I really got to work and collaborate with a lot of them and the people around them and the people behind them. So I think it just created these very, very strong bonds because there weren't that many of us, because we were all kind of felt this real genuine pull to collaborate and coordinate and make things happen on the back of this incredible enthusiasm and energy. So I think that's probably one of the reasons, and that that energy and enthusiasm enabled me to do a lot of things in the subsequent years.
That makes sense. And you're a very high energy person in general.
Yeah. I definitely think in the beginning it was a higher level of energy because, as we know, a few years in crypto, it's like cat years where it's kind of 10x normal human years. So it definitely, not necessarily dwindles, but it kind of calms after a while, especially if you've been in the trenches for 6-7 years.
Right, definitely. Like the love and optimism is still here, but it's just hard to stay so hyped the whole time. But what was the first project that you mentioned before Bounties Network?
I mean, so Bounties was the super early. I mean, let's put it out there. We were so incredibly early that I and the team had to explain bounties to a lot of people at the time, whereas now it's just like part of the vernacular. And I think it's one of the things that enabled this really rich experimentation at the time with incentives and with payment mechanisms. And what I certainly try to do is bring those into the quote unquote real world and really test them out in the field, as you will. So it was a great way to incentivize a whole range of different activities, of different projects, of different activations across many different verticals like music, social impact, research, developer, open source bounties as well, of course. But it was just and still is, because the code is still there. Somebody fork it. It's something very simple that can bring about really important, I think, changes in the flow of resources and participation.
Yeah, I remember one of the early bounties was like an ocean cleanup, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I mean, it's the OG and when you think about bounties, I think certainly with Bounties Network, you tend to think about that because it was so ambitious for its time. I mean, it was December 2018 and we were doing the stuff that, nobody has kind of attempted since at that scale and at that level of again, participation and collaboration and documentation even. And we were attempting to do this, again, with very early wallets. At the time, there were only 2 mobile wallets available for download at the time. We were working with communities of fishermen in the Philippines and really kind of rewarding them in ETH for these ocean cleanups. And I think it was a model. And the reason why I kind of wanted to do it is because I really wanted this really interesting model of being able to contribute to something, being able to record a proof of action, and being able to get paid for it and offboard all in one loop that could hopefully, in my mind at the time, and certainly something that is possible, exist by a perpetual motion of feeding itself and getting, and almost kind of like a regenerative dynamic of continuing to not only benefit the local community, but also benefit the individuals and the nature and all of these very important, at the end of the day, areas of human thriving.
Right. It was so ahead of the game.
So ahead of the game. This is why I'm exhausted, you see, because you wake up very early in the morning, you're kind of snoozy by like lunchtime.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. And then one thing I really liked about the Bounties Network is the idea of like having these bounties interoperable, like having it as a protocol, like having bounties as a protocol. And like, why don't we still have that? Like, it's like 5 years forward, and like interoperability has always been like one of the things that really that I really like about crypto, at least theoretically. But we still haven't seen it like in practice.
I'll be perfectly honest. I think, and a bunch of stuff stems from this problem that I see. It's the fact that we're trying to build this boat over there in the future while still very firmly in this current boat that we're all on and have been for decades. And this boat that we're in is like, what's mine is mine, you do you, this shit is mine, I don't really want to collaborate with you because, again, this shit is mine. So it's this mindset that really, I think, stifles sometimes, or certainly delays the ability to fully dive into the really delicious parts of crypto, like interoperability. Like, I remember when we were trying to get people to build on the standard, the main thing that, projects at the time would come back with is like, but I don't want to be interoperable because I have my token over here. So I want all the people to just be here, not over there, and then over there, and then over there, and then maybe come back to me. So it's still this mentality that, again, it's like any habit, any kind of addiction, let's say, potentially stems from, doing it over and over and over again. And then it's very hard to kick. And it's very, you have to be very intentional and very disciplined and very aware when you kick it and start doing something different and start doing something better. Really no different being, indoctrinated as we have been for, again, generations, potentially. Certainly it's accelerated recently, but it's an unlearning of all of those habits. And it can be hard when everything around you tells you that's right. Because remember, you're in this current boat. You're not in the future boat. You're in this one. And have to play by these rules.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's a technical issue, but also like personal interest preventing people, like projects, from actually collaborating. And everybody like wants to collaborate in theory. Everybody's like, oh yeah, let's collaborate. And then I see the Homer meme, like backing into the bush.
Right, exactly. And then it's like, what happened? La la la. Never mind. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of that. But again, I firmly believe that it is a habit to be kicked.
Yeah. So let's hear some lessons from the past few years. So, like, besides Bounties Network, like you mentioned Status and a bunch of other projects that you worked on. So, like, what do you think have been some of the biggest lessons of the past few years and how your perspective has changed over the years?
I definitely think, again, and maybe, again, going back to that level of enthusiasm and that level of energy, I think you really get to understand, and not just as a nice sounding tweet, that collaboration and coordination is everything. And I think for a lot of people and for a lot of the narrative, we like to say that on the surface, but on the substance doesn't quite match. A little bit like you said earlier about collaboration, about then kind of saying yay and then it fading off. I think the real crux with us moving forward as an ecosystem and making this what it needs to be is through this genuine collaboration and pooling of effort and pooling of resource, and genuinely wanting to collaborate, not because I want clout, not because I want my brand to be this, or I want my project to make this much money, or I want XYZ. Again, those very, very highly regarded pinnacles of our current world experience, but genuinely get to a point where we do things because we are aware that those things can bring forward a better state of play for a good chunk of society versus, again, a small, echelon in the right geographies. And it's taught me that, but it all also comes with these cycles that we've been through, bear bull, all of this. Like, it becomes this realization as you're standing constantly in the trenches, right? You can notice this distance between the surface and the substance a lot clearer as time goes by, because you see the people come in and you see them leave. And then, which again, as we know, it's good when, the noise dies down and it's the real believers who continue building. But I think it's important to also be mindful of how we then all continue to collaborate and engage versus, oh, here's another generation that's coming in without necessarily going through the principles that got us to this point, not necessarily having the points of reference and the values that really, again, got us to the point that we're in, where those foundations were laid by very, very intentional, very value-aligned, very principle-aligned people. And I feel one of the things that is happening to a certain extent in this last kind of cycle is we've had a lot of people for corporations coming in without going through that initiation that we all went through when we came in. And I'm seeing a lot of transfer of values, ways of operating, mentalities, just transplanted from the Web 2 and the world as we know it to Web 3 or crypto. And I don't like it. And I think it becomes this weird, this is just another industry where I can make a name, I can charge a lot of money, and then who really gives a shit if, it succeeds or not? Because I'm not, there are a lot of people coming in who are not in touch or care about those principles. They care about the clout and the money and the whatever line on the resume, which again is quite sad to an extent.
Yeah, definitely. Like people coming in for the money, like thinking they can use the technology for making money, or like just speculation. There's just this massive cultural dilution.
Indeed.
But then, like in terms of collaboration, I think it gets even worse in the bear market because everybody's so like focused on their own survival and like they have even less time to collaborate.
Which, look, I'm fully aware that people need to survive and not just, and I don't mean survive at the genuine survival level that a lot of the population on this green earth is dealing with. I'm referring to the survival, quote unquote, of projects and initiatives and so on. And yes, that is very, very important. I would have wanted for my project to survive, but it didn't. And you know what? That's fine. Obviously, it hurt at the time. But at the same time, I don't think that I would want to sacrifice the principles and the values and the collaboration with value and principle aligned people for that project's survival. Because then to me, it becomes something else. It transmutes from what it was to something else. And is it a vehicle for me to do better, or is it a vehicle for me to do better for myself?
That's a good point. And then, in terms of this cultural dilution, how do you think we can prevent that and help people on board into the space, but like actually soak in the values and not just the money?
That's a very interesting question, and I've thought about this a lot, and I think I've said this before, and I always use this term because I genuinely feel it is what we went through in those early years. It's an initiation. The fact that you get to meet in smaller groups, the fact that you get to experience things for the first time together, right? Like all of these events. It was the first East Global, the first DevCon, the first whatever, and even the second and third, right? It doesn't take away from it. But I think it's the ability to meet your people and realize that they are your people by sharing life views and values and recognizing yourself in the other is what really solidified the fact that we have found our place and we have found our people and we have found what we wanted to do. It's what solidified that for a lot of us. I mean, for me, that's that contributed so much to that energy and that belief and that ability to just keep doing things to push this forward. And I think right now, and maybe COVID had some, that lockdown thing where everybody was a bit removed and we all moved online. We kind of, for a certain wave of people, that ability to be initiated, quote unquote, kind of wasn't there. And then I wonder if that then made that wave of people do the same to onboard others, right? Without that initiation dynamic. And I don't think that it's something that you can perpetually do, right? That dynamic of initiation worked very well because we weren't that many of us in those years, certainly 2017, 2018. But I think there are opportunities to create these experiences for people through different programs. Kernel is one that comes to mind. I'm a mentor in that program, and I've seen the benefits of being part of a cohort that goes through a program that actually starts with philosophy and starts with values and starts with concepts like money and what is that about and how is that changing, and trust, and all of these very, very important ingredients to create that base where then you can go and see collaboration, build something, co-found something, get involved in some sort of community, because you've been through those things and learned about those things. And again, we're able to discuss them with a group of peers and hopefully like-minded individuals that enables you to solidify this sentiment of, these are my people, this is where I want to be, and this is where I want to apply my energy. So I definitely think this initiation piece is very, very important, and we must make more efforts to create that and maintain that and give more opportunities for people to get involved in that type of onboarding, quote unquote, or of acclimatization, let's say.
Yeah, definitely. The community definitely plays a huge part in this. And then also the right content, the kernel has, which teaches people about the values and philosophy, rather than just it's a blockchain and there are these miners and blocks and hashes and whatever. And is kernel still going?
It is still going. I think they're ramping up for their next cohort, which is KV8. And I think that's going to start somewhere in the summer. But yeah, it's something that I definitely want to see as a key piece, again, in the way people get access to what we're all doing here. And I think it's a good way for that to happen.
Definitely. Yeah, highly recommend anybody listening to go check out Kernel.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in terms of these real life events, so you've been organizing Schelling Point before that, LeaseCon. I don't know if you were involved with any other conferences, but what are some of the lessons there?
I mean, the lessons with those are that, again, very much coming from this initiation angle, and more so from the creating space angle. I think it's very, very important to create and curate spaces where people feel like they can tap into very interesting and very, dare I say, niche, or not necessarily niche, but definitely not, the key verticals of crypto, if I am to use the disturbing corporate jargon. But what certainly with Schelling Point, I always wanted to again create the space, and it's evolved so beautifully. Up until my last one that I did in Denver. Since I took over the running of it at the beginning of last year. So we did Denver 2022, we did Amsterdam during DevConnect, we did Bogota, and this final one under my direction in February this year in Denver. I think what I really, really appreciated about its evolution is exactly this: what you learn from creating and holding these spaces and seeing what and how the conversations evolve and how the interest and the involvement of the community just grew exponentially. And I think it's mainly due to the fact that you would see and have access in the Schelling Point programming to so many conversations and interesting topics that you would never see on a conference stage. We had, since Amsterdam, we had this unconference area, which was always, very, very off the wall, very different formats and interesting dynamic plays and exercises and games and ways of breaking down problems and finding solutions through these really, really interesting, containers put together by very, very interesting people, and for many of whom this was, or Schelling Point was, their very first experience of speaking or of being able to hold these things with an audience. And I think that's very, very important, not just to give the stage to people who don't necessarily, go on the established circuit, but also, again, foster this ability to chop and change and experiment with the format. Everything that I always asked my speakers, even on main stage, to do is to involve the audience in some way, so that it isn't a unilateral form of communication. It is an interaction. It is a dialogue. It is a collaborative effort. And I think pushing that forward and doing that more and more and more is what can, create this intention and this patterning of a collaborative way of doing things versus there's an audience, there's a speaker, information flows one direction only, and then what happens afterwards is TBD, probably nothing. And what I would like to see, and again, if we talk about learnings, that's something for sure that is probably the biggest one, is that in the intention of how you lay things out and how and who you bring to a space is what you will get out of it. And I think I only ever got as much sponsorship to pay for the costs. We never made any money out of it. It is essentially, or was, as I was running it, a public good in itself, which is why I wanted to do it, which is why it didn't belong to any one brand. It was a space to hold conversations, to be able to meet people who are value aligned, principle aligned, goal aligned, very into this whole human thriving, how can we do better collectively, and so on. So I think, the intention behind events is very, very important. So I think that's a nutshell takeaway.
Makes sense. And I love the topics of Schelling Point. I love that you try doing like an unconference, which, one of the first crypto conferences that I've been to was an unconference. But since then, I haven't seen, I think, any. So that's good. And it's also like a great way for people to get involved in the space, like by hearing these topics that are more like on the social impact and the regenerative side of things, rather than just purely technical or DeFi.
And I think that's one of the main things that I feel isn't necessarily, or that let's say pool of people isn't necessarily again represented by a lot of the current conference circuit, let's say. And it's one of the main things that I wanted to do with Schelling Point is provide the space for, particularly for those conversations, particularly for those people, particularly for those types of, opportunities to meet and discuss things and take things further and potentially, have discussions that maybe wouldn't, be on a traditional quote unquote crypto conference stage.
Right, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I would love to further pick your brain on event organizing stuff because, as you know, we are organizing Manifest, but I'm afraid it's not so relevant for the audience, so I will move on. You wrote a lot of tweets about biomimicry. Has that influenced Schelling Point or just like the DAOs that you're involved with, or yeah?
It did to an extent where anybody who's been to a Schelling Point knows my obsession with plants and having as many there as possible, because I do believe that we need to, just be a little bit more aware of the fact that we are part of a greater ecosystem and a greater kind of network of life. And this is almost in line with my own discoveries in this vein, I guess, or in this direction. And biomimicry definitely comes from that, where there's so much to be drawn from that knowledge of nature and how systems, complex flow network systems interact and function, that it is almost unbelievable to me that we wouldn't look to it whilst we build these decentralized systems, because there's so much there, to be, let's say, learned from, to be studied, to be potentially tried out and tested in terms of interactions between different nodes, between different networks. And it's so in line, just even terminology wise, like that should catch your interest right there. There's so much there to be understood and to really kind of get comfortable with the fact that there are a lot of processes that happen and a lot of different roles that are present in nature in complex flow networks, that it's okay for them to be present in the ones that we are also building. I think the obsession we have as humans, and again, this comes from a lot of years of doing this same thing, is we're obsessed with efficiency. And when you're obsessed with efficiency, you cut out a lot of things that maybe you shouldn't be cutting out, because by doing that, you are also affecting other things that depend on the things that you're cutting out. And so imagine, like, if you think, even just within our own bodies, when we treat one bacteria with antibiotics, the stuff around it is also going to be impacted, right? Or when you remove a certain organ, for instance, the stuff around it is going to either, its performance is going to diminish, or it will need to be supported by something else, or it will need to start functioning slightly different because that thing isn't there anymore that you remove. And without that knowledge and without that understanding of how information and resource flows and how decisions should flow and how each part could be weaker and another part could be stronger, and that's okay, and how specialization and diversity can coexist, and how you can map all of these things out to actually flow in a very, very nice and non-taxing way, it really kind of, when we zoom out on all of that, we're like, that makes complete sense because I can see it all around me. So you already have this proof of concept literally all around you in forests and parks. You don't even need a forest, a garden, anywhere in your body. So in the bodies of your pets, like, it's all there, and it's they are proofs of concept. It's just like zooming out enough to realize that that same patterning is a patterning that can also be applied to things like DAOs, which are complex flow networks, things like the money system, which is a complex flow network. So it's really just like this kind of thing that, again, it's because I'm really into it and I'm realizing a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm like, oh, holy shit, let me like tell people about this because it made so much sense to me that I feel, I might want to share them. Hence the tweets and the talks and the plans at the events.
Right. It makes complete sense. I mean, there's millions of years of evolution. There's definitely a lot of things to learn from that.
Right? Like, what is it? Janine Benyus, I think, who founded the Institute of Biomimicry says, we're talking about billions of years of research and development that nature has, with its own R&D department. And then us, bunch of humans kind of go, but I think we know better. So.
Right. Yeah. And this optimization for efficiency that's like always leads to like sacrificing resilience.
Always. Exactly that. And I think like I understand and I know it's tough to do when all you have are examples of efficiency always being applied. And also the fact that in nature, that balance between efficiency and diversity happens naturally, right? Like ecosystems, if left alone, will find their way back to that minimum window of viability, to that point in the middle, which is the balance between diversity and efficiency. Too much of a thing, not good. It stifles and it causes stagnation. Too little of a thing makes a system brittle. So because left alone, nature knows what to do, we don't. If you leave us alone, we're like, but which one should we choose? Oh my God, is it this one? Is it that one? What do I do? Do I do this? Do I pick this? Is that good? Is that bad? Is that like blah, blah, blah? So you go on what's been done before. But we already know that, for instance, in economic downturns and crises, when you apply austerity, it is the worst idea. And yet we still do it all the fucking time. Pardon my French, but all the time. So it's also one of these things of like, wait a second, what if we stop doing what we always do and maybe try something different? It may not work, but let's try something different anyway. And let's then understand, okay, well, what if this got us closer to that balance? Because worse than the extreme efficiency, it's there. That's the maximum, which is when you cut and when you just like chop everything off and then go, poof, now we can start afresh, or now we have like what we need. And if we just stop doing that and are a little bit more mindful about what we're cutting, about what we're sacrificing, about what we're like changing, maybe we start getting a little bit towards the balance, and maybe then we try a little bit more, and maybe then we try a little bit more, like, those weighting, like those scales. You add a little bit more weight, okay, what happens? And then you get to balance. Eventually, you get to balance. Versus throwing the whole damn thing out and going, oh my God, it's broken. Let's buy a new one, which is kind of...
Yeah, it's like cooking and adding these ingredients slowly and balancing them rather than just like, just gonna start anew. And then, so besides that, what do you think are some of like biggest problems in the DAO space specifically?
I mean, for me, because I am a lover of standards, I started my journey in crypto with a standard, and I am a believer in standards because, and I'm going to go back to like, a little parallel with some natural stuff. It's when you have a basis or a soil that is ready and prepped with everything that it needs in terms of nutrients, in terms of, it's nicely watered, it's like ready for you to plant things in. You're already halfway there. Now, what we're doing every single DAO that we create, we start from scratch. We get the pot, and then we are like, oh my God, which is the soil that we need? And then it's like, oh my God, what do I need to do for this soil? Then we get the compost, and we get this, and then figure out where to put it in the garden or on the windowsill and all of this stuff, which expends a lot of time and effort and resource. Versus if you have this base layer that everybody could then use, again, a pattern, you could grow anything, well, more or less. But you have the baseline and the base layer to be able to then choose, oh, I'm going to grow some tomatoes, I'm going to grow a pear tree, I'm going to grow some herbs, I don't know, whatever. The point is, right now, and this isn't necessarily about tooling, mind, okay? Because everybody thinks tooling solves the whole problem. It does not.
More tools. Just throw more tools on it.
Or I have a DAO for 1 week, let's get the tooling in. I'm like, you don't even know what the purpose of it is, what the needs of it are, what does it want to achieve, what are its values, what do you want the people coming into this DAO to do to support, and how does it all interact, and how do the resources flow up, down, and all around. So I think what I mean by standards is without having a framework that allows you to navigate and potentially, again, coming back to that interoperability in terms of the frame, the standard, that allows you to easily navigate a whole bunch of DAOs and be very mindful of expending your energy in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 without having to learn every single time you come across a new DAO the way they work, how their Notion is structured, how their Discord is structured, how you make proposals. The proposals are all different. The voting is all different. They're like 5 days here. There's 2 weeks there. There's 1 day here. All of these things that make participation and engagement non-existent. Or if it is existing, it's very tiring, which is why you see a lot of people try to stay engaged, to participate, to care, to do more, but it's physically impossible. And I say this from the perspective of being a delegate in not even in a hell of a lot of DAOs. I'm a delegate and a steward in 4. And they have a semblance of a pattern that is quasi-similar. But still, if I was to navigate and to map out, and maybe this is research being done, if it is, I would love to see it, how the different things are structured to show me just how much variety there is in just learning the basics. It's like waking up every morning and I have to relearn to tie my shoes every single time I go and try to get involved in a DAO. What am I going to do? I'm not going to wear shoes anymore, or I'm going to give up. It's like half my morning I'm learning to tie shoelaces. I'm exhausted again by the afternoon. Of course I'm going to, vote on a proposal. Go oh, I don't even know what this says. Yeah, sure. Which is how we get to the apathy, which is how we get to low engagement, which is how we get to a lot of these things. That plus, obviously, there's a million things always happening. There's attention. I think I had a tweet and I tried to make this a thing where, what was it? The DAOs are the sexual tension between attention and action. Because it's incredibly, incredibly hard to find what to put your attention on and then what is relevant for you to act on. If you're constantly being detective and you're constantly having to find your way, I've used this concept before, but it's you're in an amusement park and you don't have the map. You're how the hell am I going to find this roller coaster that I want to go on? I don't know, because I've just spent half my day searching for it. So, and now it's closed. You know what I mean? So like it feels like that sometimes with proposals or votes or and things like that, to be able to digest, to be able to gather context, to be able to genuinely be involved in the process, you have to remove, or rather better structure, these flows that I was talking about, the flows of information, the flows of context, the flows of resource, the flows of decision making, so that it isn't such a haphazard, taxing process. And then maybe also, and I'm seeing this a little bit more right now, which is great, but also remunerate people for their time. Like it's great that, if, and again, it's figuring out how the resource flows to be able to figure out, okay, what can be done in terms of remuneration, when can that activate, what is the criteria for it, and so on. But also, again, have a certain pattern and have a certain behavior that forms around governance. Governance right now has no pattern. It is an amorphous blob that just, you look at it and you're kind of like, this is a new, well, it's not even a new thing, but let's say it's a new species of a thing. It looks interesting, but I'm kind of disgusted by it. I'm kind of in awe of it, but I don't really know what to do with it. So, do you know what I mean? Like, once you kind of understand and look at what the, or establish a baseline of, let's say, I was going to say thriving, but a baseline to plan things in, and then understand what the framework is for these things to flow so that the thing grows, then you can again just like prune it, be like bonsai vibes with it, do whatever you want, but at least you know it is growing and it is flourishing. So I think figuring those things out will solve for these problems that we see right now, which are, a lot of them are just like this, they can all be classed under haphazard.
Right. Yeah, like some standardization and like some aggregation of stuff, like we have Ethereum for DeFi stuff. We need something like that for DAOs.
Exactly. Something that again isn't overly efficient, right? That we said like, oh yeah, let's cut half of it. This isn't about cutting. This is about figuring out how to best organize that circuit of information, of resource, of decision making, and make it so that it isn't, that it actually works.
Yeah, that it isn't a complete mess. Yeah, it's like it's completely impossible to work across even just like 3 DAOs, because there's just so much context gathering. Like everybody, like you said, like everybody using different Discord structure, some different, like somebody using DAO house, somebody using the compound governor, somebody using something else.
Imagine if you were a doctor and you literally every single patient that you had that was human had their like organs and their blood vessels and their limbs completely different.
Right.
What would you do? You'd be like, I don't know how to diagnose you. I don't even know where to begin. It's that. It's literally that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to get people to even we would have a lot more collaboration between organizations if it was easier to actually work across organizations, because it just isn't.
DAO interoperability, like why not? How can we make that happen? Or like some meta-governance structures that are like, again, standards that you can move and apply, and just like, again, open source economies. This is what they're all about. Open source everything is what it's all about. Have bits that you can take and then build whatever. Why don't we have like money blocks? Why don't we have governance blocks that you just like arrange, but already know from, again, a framework of what works best, that okay, it's like up to you. You can switch this for that, whatever, see if it works. Experimentation, sure. But at least there is a viable baseline that you start with like set it up for some sort of chance for it to like function well. Do you know what I mean? Like Frankenstein lives, okay, but like make the thing alive and hopefully thriving. Okay, maybe Frankenstein was the best example for it.
But yeah, like not have everybody learn from their own mistakes and just like recreate all the same shit.
Well, but this is the thing, right? Like there's also, I mean, there is the realization that also in nature, you also have decay, right? You also have death. And I think what you learn from, like, again, in complex flow networks, you have the organisms that decay that are then forming nutrients for something else, right? Like, how can we learn from the things that didn't succeed and understand and really kind of look at the pieces that did work and take those and inform a certain piece of a structure? Because again, like microbes, like bacteria, you look through in biology and even in our own bodies, there's so much learning that they kind of pass forward to other bacteria or parts of the body, like proteins and all of this. Like they actually deliver information. And that information can be about, hey, hold on a second, that was not good. Let's maybe do this in the future. I mean, this is why I think it's so fascinating looking at biology and looking at nature and looking at all these processes, because there's a lot of wisdom in those. And even again, learning from mistakes and things that didn't work is important, not just to discard it and go like, right, let's start from scratch, because that's when you can absolutely recreate that and call it by a different name.
Yeah, definitely. And then to wrap it up, what would you say, like, how do you see the future of DAOs, or like what makes you optimistic maybe?
Look, I think I wouldn't be here if I didn't think or know that we have a lot of potential ahead of us. And I think we have a lot of potential currently. The people who are involved are, again, a lot of them are very value aligned. A lot of them are very principle aligned. And I know that a great many of us want to solve these problems and want to see this become the way that we, govern ourselves and the way we organize ourselves. Whether or not there will be massive changes to the way things are done is to be seen. I hope that what we do, again, is to bring us into this collaborative alignment around doing things in a very intentional way, in a very balanced way that will get us to that minimum window of viability, which is, at the end of the day, what we need for this system, or rather this part of our system, to become something that is that thrives and doesn't just wilt and decay. So I think we have the right ingredients. It's just putting them together in the right way, in the right sequence, in the right kind of conditions, so that, again, we can get something that truly does function like we see in nature.
Amen. And then if you had one advice to give to Metagame or MetaFest, what would it be?
I think make sure the reasons why you're doing everything that you're doing is, I was going to say the right reason, but I think the main consideration would be make sure that it is something that is genuinely valuable, and not valuable in terms of cash money, but valuable in terms of genuinely evolving whatever it is that you're trying to evolve to the next stage. And as long as that intention is there, I think things kind of help to support that. If you're here, and I know that you are, to, evolve this further. And by this, I mean where we are right now, what we're all doing right now, is to get it to that next stage of evolution rather than extract as much as you can. And again, I know that you're not doing that. I think the tricky bit is sticking to it. That's the real tricky bit. When you see everybody else around you going, they're like doing the complete opposite. What the fuck? It's the sticking to it and the not, cutting a corner and doing this or doing that. That's really the hard work. And I think as long as you are true to those values, to those principles, to that light that guides and helps you believe that this is something more meaningful, not just for us as individuals, but for us as a collective and as a society and as a humanity, then, hopefully we have loftier goals that we're trying to achieve with this technology rather than same old.
Right. Well said, and sounds very applicable for other people, so that's good as well. Awesome. Yeah, this was fun. Thank you for coming on, and I hope to see you at MetaFest in Croatia.
Yes, let us chat about that. Plan, the coming back to the balance, work-life balance, also important. But yes, thank you so much for having me. Really, really enjoyed our conversations, as I always do. And hopefully see you at MetaFest.
All right. Have a great day and talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.